He may be out of your sight, but you're never out of his. And here's why this matters so much, because I think especially when you're going through storms and you're stepping, you're walking, that trying to respond to God's call in your life and God's that dream that he's placed in there, you start to take some steps of faith, and now all of a sudden you find yourself in a storm, and the winds and the waves are beating around, and you're having a hard time seeing them. It can be so easy in those moments to start to question, God, where are you? And that's really the real question, isn't it? When you're in the storm, the question, and you're going through hard times, you're going through difficult times, is not so much, God, what are you doing, but where are you in that moment? In fact, in Mark 6, in Mark 6's account, we actually see that very reality. In fact, there's a point where the storm waves are beating against them, and they actually, in the Mark 6 account, they say, God, do you even care that we're drowning? Do you even care? In other words, do you even notice? Do you even see? Where are you, God, in the midst of the winds and the waves? Where are you in the midst of the storms? I answered this call. I answered this dream. I'm taking a step out, but right now I feel like I'm drowning. Where are you, God? And here's, kind of with the time we have left, I just want to kind of speak to this story, because why I love this story so much and why it's so powerful for us, especially when you're going through some stuff, is because we get an incredible picture that actually, a picture of really this ever-present help we have in Jesus. This picture that really answers that question of, where are you, Jesus, in the midst of my storms? And I love this picture because as we're going to come to discover and sort of what I like to call kind of the timeline of our turbulence, is you're going to see where Jesus at, not just during the storm, but even before and after the storm as well. And we see this in Matthew chapter 14, verse 23 through 24. It says, after Jesus had dismissed them, notice he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. So he tells them, guys, I want you to go other side of the shore, hop in the boat, knowing that they're going into a storm. But notice where he goes up to the top of this mountainside to pray. And here's the first thing I want you to get, is before the storm, we find Jesus interceding with the right prayer. Before the storm, Jesus intercedes with the right prayer. Notice before the storm ever gets there, before the wind ever kicks up, Jesus is actively praying for them. Listen, I don't know about you, but I know that in my life, I need some people who are willing to cover me in prayer. To cover where I'm going, and my back and my side. They need to cover me in prayer. And listen, we all need that. Like when I'm going through a hard time, I don't need somebody that just says, hey, I'm thinking of you. I feel for you. No, I need somebody who's going to pray for me. Who's going to intercede for me. Who's going to lift me up to the Father in prayer. And how encouraging it is to know that in this passage we're reminded of this God, this Jesus who is our high priest, who is proactively and preemptively praying for us, interceding for us, even before the storm ever gets there. In fact, in Hebrews 7:25, it says, Jesus ever lives to make intercession for us. Amen. And I love that because, I think, speaking of some kind of misnomers in relation to Jesus, I think one of the misnomers when it comes to Jesus' ministry as it relates to us is we can almost kind of have a snowbird view of Jesus. And what I mean by that is we have this view of Jesus where, he came, he walked for some 30 years, and in 3 years of ministry, went to the cross, paid the price in full on that cross, which he did for all of our sin, all of our shame, past, present, future. But then after that, like we have this snowbird image of Jesus, like he just went up to heaven, and all of a sudden now he's just kicking back on the couch, I don't know, sipping margaritas and just relaxing and waiting to come back someday. But that's not the reality. See, the truth is, while his work on the cross may be finished, his work in our lives is not. Amen. We have a high priest in heaven. We have a Father. We have Jesus in our lives who's interceding before the Father, who again is proactively, preemptively covering us in prayer, even before the storms start to rage. In fact, a great example of this is in Luke chapter 22, verses 31 through 32. He's speaking to Simon Peter about this, and it's a great picture of how God intercedes for us proactively and preemptively in our lives. It says, Simon, Satan has asked to sift all of you out as wheat, but I have prayed for you. In other words, Peter, there's a storm coming. There's a storm on its way. The waves are going to get rough. The wind's going to start to blow. But hey, good news is I prayed for you. I prayed for you. Now, let's be honest. Some of us, we hear that. If you're really honest, there's probably more than a few of us that are like, probably thinking, is that all? Like, I mean, here you're talking about like an enemy that's wanting to sift me out as free, like, which literally means rip me apart. And you're just going to pray for me? But what you got to understand is that for Peter, like, this would have been a huge encouragement for him because he understood what this meant. See, for the disciples, they understood that there was this incredible connection between the power and the miracles of Jesus and the prayer life of Jesus. You know, when it comes to the work that Jesus did, the ministry Jesus did on earth, when the blind eyes were opened, when the lame began to walk, when those who were broken and without hope, found hope, when the loaf and the bread and some fish were multiplied to feed the 5,000. Listen, they knew a connection. They knew these things didn't just happen. There was a connection between the miracles of Jesus and the all-night prayer times where Jesus would just spend getting alone with his Father in prayer. They weren't two different things. There was a connection there. They saw the importance of that because what Jesus understood, what Peter understood, what the disciples would come to understand is that prayer is how things actually happen. Like nothing happens in God's kingdom economy without prayer. Prayer is how things happen. Prayer is how God moves. Prayer is how God works. And it's through this process of prayer. In fact, it's part of the reason why Jesus at one point said, hey, you know what? Maybe the reason you're not seeing my work, or the reason you're not seeing the miraculous, the reason you're not seeing me work in your life, the reason you're not seeing answers to your prayers, because you don't ask. You don't pray. Prayer is the engine that God works through to do the miraculous in our lives. Amen. So when Peter's hearing this, this is more than just, hey, I'm praying for you, thinking of you, feel for you, and walks off. No, when Peter hears this, he's like, yeah, something's about to happen. Like something, like, man, thank goodness. Like he would have drawn so much encouragement from this. Like that's awesome. Yes, Jesus, you're praying for me. I'm so glad that you prayed. I'm so glad that you prayed that trouble wouldn't come, that I'm going to make it through this. I'm going to walk through this and unscathed, that I'm not even going to have to deal with this fight. I'm not even going to have to deal with the enemy. Like you're already taking care of it for me. But this is kind of where the rub comes for a lot of us, because I love Jesus' response. It's like, well, actually, Peter, that's not quite what I pray for you. And this is where we start to kind of get to the whole right prayer aspect in terms of what Jesus prays for us. Because notice what he prays for. He says, but I've prayed for you, Simon, that your faith may not fail. You mean, you didn't pray that Satan wouldn't be able to sift me like wheat? Like, you mean you didn't pray the storm would come? You mean you didn't pray that nothing bad would happen? Like, you had this all-night prayer-long meeting with the Father, and you guys are one, so I don't even know what you would have to shoot the breeze about by long. And out of all of that, you didn't think about praying that the storm would just go away? That my faith wouldn't fail? See, here's the deal. Is so often when we pray, God, weaken the wind. But Jesus prays, when Jesus prays for us, it's to build their faith, strengthen their faith. We pray, God, get me out of this, but God prays that we would get something out of it. And this is tough for us, right? Because, and this is why I say that he covers us, he intercedes with the right prayer. He prays the prayer that, let's be honest, we're rarely praying when we're in the middle of a storm. Because when we're in the middle of a storm, we're obsessed with the storm around us. We're obsessed with the struggle. We're obsessed with the fight. We're praying, when it's an argument, it's a storm in our marriage. We're praying, God, you need to fix them. You need to change them. You need to do something with them. We're praying for that. Like we'll pray when we're in the storm. I found that we'll pray more frequently, but we'll pray less faithfully. Because we just want to get out of the storm. Yeah. And yet Jesus' prayer, when we're talking about him, covering us with the right prayer, praying the prayer that a lot of us don't think of or even want to pray, probably in those moments. He's praying that God strengthen their faith. Because there's something I'm trying to bring out of them, something I'm trying to grow in them. See, from God's vantage point, you got to understand the storm in you is always more important than the storm around you. And again, this is a challenge for us because our tendency, and especially when it comes to answering God's call in our life, walking in God's will for our life, God's plan for our life, is we like to, when storms happen, difficulty comes, we look to pray our way out of life, but God looks to pray his way into our life. Because, get this, in a spiritual sense, most shipwrecks in life, especially when we're talking about, answering God's call in our life, maybe in relation to, shipwrecks when it comes to our life, our marriage, our ministry, they're not because of the storm outside the boat, but the storm inside the boat. It's the fear inside, it's the unconfessed sin inside, it's the doubt, it's the worry inside. And so when Jesus intercedes on our behalf, while he'll deal with the storm, the storm outside, it matters to him. But his primary concern is the storm inside. It's doing a work on the inside of you. It's the fear, it's this insecurity, it's this worry, it's this doubt, it's this bitterness, this anger. I'm dealing with some stuff inside you because it's the storm in you that is more important than simply just the storm around you. Yeah. Because I got a call on your life. I'm leading you to something. And listen, it doesn't matter. The storm waters can be all calm. But if your life is just a raging storm in here, man, I'm telling you, eventually those floodwaters are going to take you down. And so that's why I say when he prays the right prayer, he's praying, God, strengthen their faith, because that's the goal. It's not simply to allow storms simply to stir up trouble, but he's trying to stir up faith. Trying to stir up faith in our lives, which leads to the second thing, during the storm. Where's God during the storm? Before the storm, Jesus intercedes with the right prayer. During the storm, Jesus intervenes at the right time. And again, speaking of the rub, this can be a real rub for us, especially when we're in a storm, because I found that God's right time never feels like the right time to me. Yeah. And listen, for the disciples, it wouldn't have felt like the right time to them either. Verse 25, check this out. It says, shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and they cried out in fear. Now, the key phrase here that I want you to get is just before dawn. Just before dawn. That term there is literally translated in the original Greek as the fourth watch. We just say just before dawn because that's more of our understanding of time. But back then, in ancient times, in Roman days, that term, the fourth watch, was in reference to sort of military time of the day. As oftentimes when they would have guards kind of posted to watch the walls of a city overnight, rather than have a crew of soldiers try to stay awake for 12 straight hours, they would break them up into 4 watches. And so these watches that they would have would be from, the first watch was from 6 to 9 p.m., the second was 9 to 12, the third was 12 to 3, the fourth was 3 to 6. Now, this is where it gets, again, where I say our right time, or his right time, never feels like the right time to us. Because without a doubt, if the disciples had a choice, I guarantee you they would not say, hey, Jesus, why don't you just wait till the fourth watch to show up? No, they would have wanted it right then, like when the storm waters just started kicking up. And yet, that's not when Jesus decides to show up. He decides to show up not when the storm breaks out. Like I could understand if you let me just go through a little bit of this. But Jesus waits to the very darkest moment, to the place where it seems like there's no hope. And again, if you're the disciples in this moment, it's a fourth watch. You've been, getting battered and beaten by the waves of the storm. No doubt they're like, Jesus, like of all the nights, like you decide to have the all-night prayer meeting, like really right now. Like we're struggling. We're going through it. And now you decide to show up. Now again, you got to understand the whole purpose behind sending them out in the first place. Setting their GPS in a way that would take them through a storm rather than around it. And again, it wasn't to stir up trouble in their lives, but it was to stir up faith. And not faith in themselves, but faith in our God. In fact, going back to Mark's account, again in Mark 6:48, we see this reality at play. It says, he saw the disciples straining at the oars, and this kind of gets to a little bit of the point of why he waited so long. Why not just show up right in the moment? It's because all the way up that first watch, that second watch, that third watch, Mark's account shows them as straining at the oars. They're doing their best. They're rowing. They're giving everything they got to get out of the storm. So why wait to the fourth watch? Why wait to the point where they're done? They've given up on rowing. They've thrown their hands up in exasperation. Because, well, let's be honest, here's the reality. Is if he'd showed up at the first watch, the tendency would have been for the disciples, as it is in our life, is to sit there and think, oh, well, the reason I got out of this storm is my own strength. I just rowed myself out of it. I did this on my own. Thank goodness I watched a bunch of P90X videos the night before. It's really paying off. I did it on my own. But again, remember, God's calling them to something bigger and better in their lives. He's trying to stretch their faith, trying to stretch and grow their faith, but a faith not in themselves, but a faith in our God, because he realized that what they were going to be going through in this new season, this next season of ministry, was going to require more than simply their strength, their ability, their own confidence in themselves could get them through. And the same works in our lives too. What God is calling you to, when God calls you to something, it's going to be something that's always going to stretch you beyond simply what you can do and what you can handle on your own. And again, it's not to stir up trouble, it's not to just make life difficult on you, but it's because he's trying to stir up some faith in you. But a faith not simply in your own ability, your own strength, just in you, but in our God. And so that's what he's doing there. He's stretching their faith. In fact, I like how George Mueller puts it. He has this great quote. He says, faith begins, get this, where man's power ends. Faith begins. Speaking of this stretching of faith, it begins where men's power ends. We see God's intervention happening at the moment of our exasperation. But not just that, too, especially speaking of God's intervention doesn't just happen at the point of our exasperation. What I find in the story, and again, this can also be a little bit of the rub and challenge for us, is that God's intervention is inevitable, but it's not always instant. It's inevitable, but it's not always instant. He always comes. He just doesn't always come exactly when you want him to. The Bible puts it this way. It says, weeping may endure for the night, but joy comes in the morning. Now notice it doesn't say this morning. It doesn't say tomorrow morning even. It's going to come some morning. It's inevitable. It's going to happen. And yet this is the challenge, because when it's not instantaneous, when sometimes the change in the work he's doing it feels more like a process he's walking us through, it can be easy in those moments to really struggle to see it happening, to struggle to see what God is doing, to struggle to see even where God is at. Certainly that was the case for them. No doubt when he shows up, they had to think, man, he's simply late to the party, but that couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, Matthew 14:27, I like how Jesus speaks to this. It says, but Jesus immediately said to them, take courage, it is I, don't be afraid. I love that, it is I. Two of some of the most vital theological words in the entire Bible. Because it is I is made up of two Greek words, ego and me. And literally, these are the same words, the same phrase, the same name that back in the Old Testament that God used when Moses asked, hey, who should I say is sending me to go speak about the deliverance, who's delivering the people out of Egypt? Who should I say is sending me? And of course, God just simply says, I am that I am. That's what Jesus is saying. When he's saying, it is I, those words, ego and me, it's saying, I am that I am. See, he was giving clues of clarity about who he actually is, who he actually was. But not just that, he was actually speaking to the fact of what he was up to. See, in Exodus, I am is the name God describes to himself, not just to describe who he is, but he describes to himself immediately before he delivers his people. In other words, look, guys, I know that right now it seems like you're drowning in the storm. It seems like it's going nowhere. But you can trust that, hey, while my rescue, it might not seem, my intervention, it might not seem to happen instantaneous, or at least in the time frame you think it should happen. And listen, it's inevitable. I'm working some stuff here. I'm working some things for your deliverance. I'm working some things for your good. I'm working some things for your freedom. I'm working some things to do the miraculous in your lives, which leads to the very last part. Because again, when you're in that moment, it can be so hard to see. It can be so hard to see what Jesus is doing, where Jesus is at in the middle of the storm. Which leads to the last thing, which we'll wrap up with this, is after the storm, Jesus introduces the right perspective. After the storm, Jesus introduces the right perspective. Check this out, verses 32 and verses 33. It says, "And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, 'Truly, you are the Son of God.'" Before the storm, they couldn't see him at all. During the storm, they struggled to see him. But notice it was only after the storm that they began to really see him for who he really is, who he really was, what he was really doing in their life behind the scenes. Because here's the reality, and here's the truth, is that revelation always requires retrospection in our lives. A revelation of who God is, where God is, it always requires retrospection. Look, I almost never fully understand what God is doing in my life in the moment, especially in the storms, especially when I'm going through a trial, I'm going through a situation that makes absolutely no sense to me whatsoever. But it's in those moments that, again, in the moment, I can't understand, but it's amazing how when I take the time to remember, when I take the time to look back,